welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be doing something special that I've never done before, which is doing an audio reading of a short story. In this case, it is A Matter of Interpretation by M. Elizabeth Ticknor. I originally read this in the Heroic Fantasy Short Stories collection done by Flame Tree Publishing. It's got a bunch of new and old short stories. And I reached out to the author on her website, and she actually got back to me and did give me permission to do an audio reading, which I thought was pretty awesome. Now, I want to note you can read the full text both in this book and on her website, ticknortales.com, so you can check it out there. And then what's going to be coming is me actually doing the reading, since she was so nice to allow me to do so. I want to make very clear, all rights for the audio version are still reserved by the author. I make no such claim. But with no further ado, let's jump to the reading. Hello. Today we'll be reading from Heroic Fantasy Short Stories with A Matter of Interpretation by M. Elizabeth Ticknor. The Dragonspine Mountains swallowed up the stars in the eastern half of the desert sky. Sayers tended the fire at his master's campsite in an attempt to stave off the darkness. He'd never seen anything so massive or imposing. He wished that his master, Tyrion, had not insisted on making camp in their shadow the previous evening. The sun-bleached peaks warped the wind into howls that echoed through the air like ravenous beasts. Tyrion exited his tent at dawn and motioned for Sayers to approach. "Sit, I want to examine your seam work." The runic tattoos that covered Sayers' body glowed white as Tyrion's command took root. Sayers grunted in acknowledgement and knelt at his master's feet. Even kneeling, Sayers' head was parallel with Tyrion's shoulders. Had Tyrion not taken on the mantle of necromancy, Sayers felt he would have made an excellent tailor. He had composed Sayers from the choicest parts of a dozen different corpses, woven together with silk thread and spellwork. Sayers did not understand why he had been driven to such gruesome work, but appreciated the craftsmanship required to accomplish such a daunting task. Tyrion let out a satisfied sigh as his hands finished tracing the stitches that held Sayers' limbs together. "Good, good. How is your healing? Place your hand in the fire." Sayers grimaced, but did as Tyrion commanded. He sucked in a sharp breath as his hand began to burn. He forced himself to hold it steady until the smell of cooking flesh reached his nostrils. "Now pull it out." Sayers followed Tyrion's bidding. Dead nerves tingled back to life as his injury healed over and left fresh, unscarred skin. "Excellent. You're complete, or as complete as I can make you. Come morning, we'll put you to work." Sayers gave a single nod. Tyrion preferred him to speak only when necessary, but this seemed important enough to merit a question. "What would you have me do?" "I would have you tear down the gates of Rosafia." The implicit promise of violence made Sayers' scalp prickle. He frowned. "Why?" "Because the Valdians are losing the war, and I've been hired to change that. Taking Rosafia should turn the tide. Once you destroy the gates and rout the guards, the Valdian army can take the pass and solidify their supply lines. Lord Irene will grant me lands and title once the job is done." Sayers' neck and shoulder muscles clenched. Over the last few weeks, Tyrion had taught him a great deal about war and strategy. The lessons had been grim and unsettling. "I do not want to harm anyone." Tyrion threw his hands up in the air. "By the roiling havoc, you're not supposed to want anything." He knitted his brow and shook his head. "I suppose that's what I get for designing a golem intelligent enough to create adaptive strategies. The anatomists of House Erebus say the brain houses the soul. Perhaps I should have used an animal brain rather than a human one. I am fully functional. My body is strong." "Your body is not what I worry about. My mind is sound." "Silence!" The command struck Sayers like a slap to the face. His tattoos flared to life and clamped his jaw shut so tightly that it ached. Tyrion glanced at Sayers. "Better." He stood and circled Sayers with narrowed eyes. "Insolence will not be tolerated. You are meant to take orders, not to question them." Sayers stared into the fire. The sudden inability to speak left him numb and hollow. Tyrion might as well have ordered him to rip out his tongue. The village of Rosafia pressed tightly against the cliffs and surrounded the only pass between the Dragonspine Mountains for 50 leagues. A pair of blue-flecked granite towers dwarfed the huts and hovels of the common folk. The bloodwood gates that cut off the pass were strong enough to keep an entire Valdian army at bay. They were well-manned and designed to withstand massive onslaughts from the outside. They were not, however, fortified against a potential attack from within. Tyrion led Sayers into town at midday, dressed in the fine dyed linens of a merchant. Sayers dragged a wooden cart that contained Tyrion's traveling supplies, as well as 24 bolts of cloth, should they need to validate their cover story as textile merchants. Sayers' muscles burned with every step as he strained to slow his pace. He lurched onward, shoulders slumped, head hung low. His tattoos flickered every time he hesitated. He hoped the glow was dim enough in the daylight that Tyrion would not take notice. Tyrion strode confidently beside him, spying military drill straight. "Don't shamble so. I built you better than that." The tattoos that covered Sayers' body blazed. The compulsion to obey was overwhelming. Sayers straightened his posture and steadied his gait, but kept his pace methodical and slow. The stares of the people on the street pricked and needled at Sayers as he walked through town. Even slumped forward, cloaked and cowled, he stood taller than anyone in the crowd. His shoulders stretched broad as the yokes of the oxen that pulled the trader's wagon. Tyrion surveyed Rosafio like a wildcat ready to pounce. "Smash the gates, then knock down the towers. If anyone gets in your way, kill them." Sayers' tattoos flared. He ground his teeth and clenched his fists tightly around the cart's handle grips, but no matter how much he focused, his legs drove him forward. Sayers abandoned the cart as he approached the gates. His muscles rippled as he pushed against the doors that were meant to be pulled. Steel-braced wood creaked, groaned, and splintered. Sayers pressed unrelentingly against the doors until the gate's hinges cracked, then snapped under the pressure. Cries of alarm rang out across the plaza as the two halves of the gate toppled to the ground. A trio of guards rushed Sayers to the base of the northernmost tower. He tossed them aside like rag dolls. His tattoos flared and urged him to follow through on ensuring their demise, but he focused on the need to collapse the towers. The guards were not presently in his way, and the orders for destruction had come first. He would worry about whether or not he was required to kill them later. The tower's stonework was solid and well-fitted. If Sayers charged at full force, he would be lucky to even crack the stone. There was, however, a wooden door, and in the end, all doors were meant to be opened. Sayers rammed against the door, shoulder first, until he broke it down. Guards clambered down the stairs as he ducked into the room. He ignored them. They were not yet in his way. There, the support beams. Sayers slammed into the closest beam with all of his weight. It cracked from the force. One of the guards charged him, but he sidestepped and rammed the man into the wall. He tossed the bloody guard into the arms of his fellows and stalked toward the next beam. The guards bolted for the exit. Sayers gave them time to flee. When he was certain they had all evacuated the tower, he struck the remaining support beams hard enough to shatter them. The tower collapsed around him. Sharp, jarring, agony surged through his body as a deluge of stone. Wood and mortar poured down on his head and shoulders. His back snapped under the strain. The crushing weight of death enveloped him. Sayers bit back an agonized scream as Tyrion's magic dragged him back to sentience. Bones and flesh attempted to knit together despite the unrelenting press of the rubble above him. Bones healed in excruciatingly wrong positions, then broke again every time he tried to move. Sayers thrashed and writhed, desperate for relief. After what seemed like an eternity, he gained enough freedom to crawl out from the debris. He lay on his back, panting, as bones snapped back into their proper positions, and muscles slithered into place around them. A surge of panicked voices enveloped him. "It can't be human. No one could survive that. The whole tower landed on its head. Look at its arm." Sayers' shoulder popped back into place as he staggered to his feet. A dozen guardsmen surrounded him, shields and spears at the ready. They were poised to fight, but their eyes were wide and their limbs trembled. Sayers made eye contact with each of them in turn. If he were careful, he should be able to push through the crowd. As long as he could get through, they were not in his way. His body still ached from the tower's collapse. His muscles were barely responsive, his movements jerky. It took most of his energy to brush the guards aside before they surrounded him. The magic-born inclination toward mayhem and slaughter surged through him anew. He clenched his jaw, shook his head to clear it, and pushed on toward the southern tower. Panicked civilians swarmed the road between the towers. Some rushed toward the gates, others sought to flee them, and even more simply stood in place and gawked at the wreckage. Murderous intent surged within Sayers, but he fought it desperately. He did not want to kill. He did not want to kill. He ran down his list of orders. Silence. Break the gates. Destroy the towers. Kill anyone who got in his way. Tyrion couldn't have meant him to be silent forever. Sayers' tattoos flared as he bellowed a wordless warning cry toward the crowd. The act of rebellion burned like fire. Sayers charged toward the crowd, yelling all the way. People scrambled to escape his path. Not all of them moved fast enough. Sayers gritted his teeth and slowed down to avoid them. The guards caught up and surrounded him. Their formation was tighter this time. They glared at him with eyes like steel. Sayers balked. His tattoos seethed with arcane energy. Tyrion's words burned into his mind. The guards were in his way. There was no way through. He had to kill them. He had to. The repercussions of disobedience scorched him like an inferno. Even so, the pain did not compare to the torture of having been trapped alive under the weight of the collapsed tower. If he had pushed through that, he could push through this. White-hot magic blazed from every tattoo and stitch seam. Through the pulsing thrum of energy, he heard one of the guards demand his surrender. He ground his teeth, bowed his head, and placed his hands behind his neck. Tyrion's voice rang out over the throng. "What are you doing? I did not bid you to surrender." Sayers spotted Tyrion in a matter of moments. He had been blending in with the crowd, most likely playing the part of a panicked citizen. Sayers' stomach clenched with fear. "Kill them! Kill them all!" Sayers howled as the order tore into him. He collapsed to the ground, clutching his head in his hands. He wanted to ease the pain, even if that meant crushing his own skull. He fought his commands as it filled his mind with anguish. He could live with pain. He was designed to live with pain. He ground his teeth together and forced himself to weather out the agony. The longer it continued, the more he was able to bear it. He stood and glared at Tyrion. "No." Tyrion stared at him wide-eyed. "What?" Sayers roared. "No!" Tyrion flinched and stepped back. He pulled an obsidian orb from the folds of his cloak and began to chant. As he took aim at Sayers, 2 guards lunged for him. Tyrion spat a command, and a crackling orb of energy enveloped the more muscular of the pair. He fell to the ground screaming as his flesh melted from his bones. His companions swore and backed away. Sayers snarled and bore down on Tyrion like a tidal wave. He grabbed Tyrion by the throat before the mage could begin his chant anew. Tyrion dropped his focus orb and scrabbled frantically to loosen Sayers' grip, but Sayers lifted him into the air with one hand. Tyrion pried at Sayers' fingers. He tried to choke out a phrase, an order, a spell, but could not draw enough air to speak. It would be so easy to end it, to snap Tyrion's neck, smash open his skull, and watch his brains leak out onto the cobblestones. But Sayers did not want to kill. He took a deep breath and then let it out slowly. No. He brought a foot down on the focus orb and crushed it to powder. Then he dropped Tyrion like a pile of wet rags. Tyrion collapsed on the hard-packed earth, gasping and clutching at his throat. Guards glanced between Sayers and Tyrion, uncertain of who to target. "Surrender!" the captain bellowed. "Hands on the back of your head!" Sayers almost gave in out of sheer exhaustion, but he forced himself to think. Surrender would leave him bound to the will of the guards, perhaps even the will of Tyrion. He did not want to surrender. He wanted freedom. Sayers ran toward the broken gates. Spears whistled through the air after him. Some struck home and embedded themselves into his flesh, but the damage was not sufficient to slow him. He pressed on long after the shattered gates disappeared behind the cliffs. He did not know what lay on the other side of the pass. He only knew that, whatever dangers he faced, he would face them of his own volition. So I hope you enjoyed the reading. Let's discuss a little bit about this short story. And the first thing I want to say is short stories are something I've been trying to get more into because it's a really interesting device for storytelling. You don't have a lot of time. By the name, it's a short story, so you really have to do things a little bit differently and work harder in some ways to get things done really quickly. You don't have the expanse of several books or even a full book to really tell your story, and so it's just kind of interesting seeing how the approach is so very different. And I think in a lot of ways short stories can be hard because, yes, it's really hard to outline huge long plot lines and things like that, but getting a satisfying story in a short amount of time can be difficult. So there's some things that really stood out about this story immediately. First thing, when I hear Dragonspine Mountains, I immediately feel fantasy. There have been a lot of similarly named mountain ranges, and starting with that kind of familiar piece there that instantly screams fantasy world, I really like. It tells me where we are without really having to go any deeper at that point. And then we take a look at Sayers and his master Tyrion, and through some really short bits of dialogue and even kind of the internal narration, seeing what Sayers is thinking, we get a lot of looks into that character very, very quickly. I loved the little comment about how he didn't know why his master decided to be a necromancer, but he thought he would have made a really good tailor. Just kind of shows his thought process, which is, of course, very important to the story, and then we kind of quickly learn what the motivations are of Tyrion.
that part's pretty simple. He's getting paid. He's going to become a lord. It's, once again, something that makes sense. But really the more complicated emotions come from our golem, Sayers, as he is trying to figure out exactly how he gets out of doing this, because he doesn't want to kill anybody. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. But he's compelled by the magic that is tattooed basically all over his body. It kind of forces him to do so. So getting to take a look, seeing him trying to think like what's the exact letter of the word here, kind of reminds you something we've seen, of course, where like when you make a deal with a wizard or a genie or something, it's always the exact letter, and just kind of that lighter-hearted look where, okay, he said silence, but he probably didn't mean that forever, and trying to figure it out. And the interesting end, too, where he actually kind of overcomes it and realizes, yeah, this is extremely painful because the magic is causing me intense pain, but it's still better than having to actually kill people and being crushed by buildings. So I'm gonna go. And the kind of the end is maybe it's a little pithy, but I just like the end, very last couple sentences where he's going, and no matter what happens, it'll be because he decides it. And you really get this sense of freedom, even though from the story, Sirius has only existed a short time as a golem. It sounds like still pretty new at the beginning, and even though it's a very short story, you just feel like you kind of get to know that character enough that you really do feel that he's really just wants to go make decisions and not have to be under anyone's power. And so I think the author here really accomplished a lot with this short story, and I thought it was very enjoyable. So it was really nice to have. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you can read the full text version on Anne Elizabeth Ticknor's website, ticknortales.com. It is there, and that is linked in the description for you as well. Once again, all rights for the audio reading are reserved by the author. She was gracious enough to let me do this, which I thought was really cool. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Lastly, I just wanted to comment, if you do want to see more things like this, is this something that you enjoyed, having short story readings? This is obviously the first time I've done this, and I thought it sounded like a lot of fun, and I enjoyed making it, but wanted to kind of see, is this something that you guys want to see more of? So let me know in the comments. If you haven't, like the video and subscribe to my channel if you do want to see more of my content.